Eric Johnson's eyes widened as his ship plummeted through the misty atmosphere of Lemnoria. The alien planet's constant humidity had already begun to affect his instruments, causing critical malfunctions. As alarms blared, he gritted his teeth, realizing the girls of this world weren't the only ones about to get wet. The dense tropical jungle rushed up to meet him as he fought for control. Sweat beaded on his brow, his muscles straining against the G-forces. With a bone-jarring impact, the craft slammed into the soggy ground, skidding to a halt in a clearing. Silence fell, broken only by the hiss of escaping gases and the patter of ever-present moisture. Eric took a deep breath, wincing at the twinge in his ribs. He was alive but stranded on an unexplored world with no means of communication. Unbuckling his harness, he ran a systems check. The news wasn't good. His long-range transmitter was fried, and the hull had sustained significant damage. Repairs would take time he might not have on this alien world. Eric popped the hatch, immediately assaulted by a wave of humid air. The mist clung to his skin as he climbed out, his boots sinking into the damp earth. All around him, the jungle pulsed with alien life, strange calls echoing through the trees. As he surveyed the damage to his ship, movement caught his eye. A figure emerged from the undergrowth, and Eric froze. It was clearly sentient, but unlike any species he'd encountered. The being had blue-tinted skin and webbed appendages, perfectly adapted to this water-rich environment. The alien, a female, Eric guessed, stared at him with equal parts fascination and fear. Her skin glistened with a constant sheen of moisture, an evolutionary trait that immediately piqued Eric's scientific curiosity. He raised his hand slowly, trying to appear non-threatening. "Hello," he said, knowing she wouldn't understand. "I'm Eric. I come in peace." The alien tilted her head, clearly not comprehending. Eric pointed to himself. "Eric?" he repeated, then gestured to her questioningly. After a moment's hesitation, she placed a webbed hand on her chest. "Marek," she said, her voice melodious and slightly gurgling. Eric smiled, relieved at this small breakthrough. He mimicked the action of eating, then sleeping, hoping to convey his need for assistance. Marek seemed to understand, gesturing for him to follow. As they trekked through the jungle, Eric observed more about his guide and her world. The ground never dried, a constant squelch beneath their feet. Marek moved with a fluid grace, her webbed appendages clearly an advantage in this environment. After a short journey, they emerged into a clearing. Eric's jaw dropped at the sight of a Lemnorian village. Structures built on stilts rose above the soggy ground, connected by a network of elevated walkways. The architecture was clearly designed to cope with the planet's perpetual dampness. Marek led him into the village where Eric found himself the center of attention. Lemnorians of all ages gathered to stare at the strange, dry-skinned visitor. Eric noticed that all of them, especially the females, shared Marek's moist skin. The village elders soon convened, their webbed hands gesticulating as they debated in their gurgling language. Eric could only guess at the content of their discussion, but the frequent glances in his direction made it clear he was the primary topic. As night fell, Eric was shown to a small hut on the village's outskirts. Marek took up a position nearby, clearly assigned to guard him. The human astronaut settled in, his mind racing with questions and observations. He activated his wrist computer, beginning to log his experiences. The constant humidity was already causing him discomfort, his human physiology ill-equipped for Lemnoria's climate. Yet his scientific curiosity burned bright, driving him to document everything he could about this water-rich world and its fascinating inhabitants. As he worked, Eric glanced at Marek. The Lemnorian female watched him warily, her moist skin glistening in the dim light. He offered a smile, hoping to bridge the gap between their species. Whether he was a guest or a prisoner remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. His mission had taken an unexpected and thrilling turn on this alien world where the girls were always wet. As dawn broke over the Lemnorian village, Eric awoke to the familiar sound of water droplets pattering against the roof of his hut. He stretched, his muscles aching from days of unaccustomed humidity. The air clung to his skin, a constant reminder of his alien surroundings. Outside, Marek stood watch, her blue-tinted skin glistening in the early morning light. Eric nodded to her as he emerged, noting how her webbed fingers flexed in response. Over the past few days, he'd grown accustomed to her presence, finding comfort in her unwavering vigilance. Eric activated his wrist computer, pleased to see progress in the Universal Translator's algorithms. He approached Merrick, clearing his throat. "Good morning," he said, his words partially translated into gurgling sounds. Merrick's eyes widened. "You speak?" she replied, her voice a mix of gurgles and recognizable words. Eric grinned. "Learning," he said, tapping his wrist device. "Slowly." Their rudimentary conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several village elders. They gestured for Eric to follow, leading him to his crashed ship. As they approached, Eric saw a group of Lemnorians already gathered around the vessel, examining its damaged hull with obvious curiosity. One elder, distinguished by elaborate markings on his webbed appendages, stepped forward. "We help," he gurgled, pointing at the ship. "You teach." Eric nodded eagerly, recognizing the opportunity for cultural exchange. He began by demonstrating basic repair techniques, using gestures and simple words to explain the function of various tools. The Lemnorians watched intently, their webbed hands mimicking his movements. As days passed, Eric found himself working side by side with Marik and other Lemnorians. He marveled at their ingenuity, watching as they adapted human engineering principles to their water-rich environment. They introduced him to unique Lemnorian materials, flexible, waterproof substances that could potentially revolutionize Earth's marine technology. One afternoon, as Eric examined a particularly stubborn piece of damaged hull, he realized the extent of the repairs needed. He turned to Merrick, who had become his primary assistant. "Need parts," he said, pointing to the sky. "From home." Merrick's expression shifted, a mix of concern and curiosity rippling across her features. She relayed the message to the elders, who convened in a tight circle, their gurgling voices rising and falling in heated debate. Finally, the lead elder approached Eric. "Send message," he said, his tone cautious, "but stay here. We watch." Eric nodded, understanding their wariness. He set to work on the ship's long-range transmitter, hoping the signal would penetrate Lemnoria's dense atmosphere. As they waited for a response, Eric immersed himself in Lemnorian culture. He observed their daily routines, fascinated by how every aspect of their lives revolved around water. One evening, he witnessed a spectacular display that left him awestruck. Two Lemnorians entered a shallow pool in the village center. They began an intricate underwater dance, their bodies twisting and turning in perfect synchronization. Suddenly, their skin lit up with bioluminescent patterns, creating a mesmerizing light show beneath the surface. Eric turned to Merrick, his eyes wide with wonder. "What's happening?" he asked, the translator struggling with the complex question. Merrick's skin flushed a deeper blue. "Mating ritual," she gurgled softly. "They choose life partners." Intrigued, Eric peppered Merrick with questions about Lemnorian reproduction. As he listened to her explanations, translated through his wrist device, his scientific curiosity grew. The concept of external fertilization, similar to Earth's amphibians, was fascinating from a biological perspective. Merrick, in turn, began asking about human mating practices. Eric hesitated, realizing the potential for misunderstanding. He pulled out his datapad, sketching simple diagrams to illustrate human reproduction. As he explained internal fertilization and live birth, he noticed Merrick's expression change. Her eyes widened, and she took a step back, her webbed hands trembling slightly. "Inside?" she gurgled, her voice rising in pitch. "Dangerous!" Eric tried to reassure her, but the damage was done. Word spread quickly through the village, and soon Eric found himself at the center of a growing controversy. Some Lemnorians, led by a vocal elder, began to view him as a potential threat to their way of life. Others, including Merrick, advocated for continued cultural exchange. Eric often overheard heated debates in the village square. His name gurgled amidst rapid-fire Lemnorian speech. As tensions rose, Eric noticed a change in Merrick's behavior. She began to stand closer to him during their work sessions, her webbed fingers occasionally brushing against his arm. Despite her initial fear of human reproduction, She seemed drawn to him, her large eyes following his movements with undisguised fascination. Eric found himself responding to her attention, intrigued by the idea of interspecies attraction. Yet he remained acutely aware of the delicate situation in the village and the vast biological differences between them. One evening, as they sat by the edge of the village, watching the twin moons of Lemnoria rise over the misty jungle, Marek turned to Eric. "Your people," she gurgled softly. "They come soon?" Eric sighed, glancing at his silent wrist computer. "I hope so," he replied, his words translated into gentle gurgles. "But I'm not sure they received my message." Marek's webbed hand found his, her cool, moist skin a stark contrast to his own. "If they don't?" she asked, her large eyes reflecting the moonlight. Eric squeezed her hand gently, realizing that his fate on this alien world was far from certain. As he gazed out over the misty jungle, he knew that regardless of whether help arrived, his relationship with Marek and the Lemnorians had irrevocably changed him. The challenges ahead, repairing his ship, bridging the cultural divide, and navigating his complex feelings for Marek, loomed large in his mind, each as vast and mysterious as the alien world around him. Eric's gaze lingered on the misty jungle, his mind processing the weight of Marek's question. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the constant drip of water from the surrounding foliage. He turned to face her, noting the concern in her large, expressive eyes. "If they don't come," he began, his words translated into soft gurgles, "I'll need to find a way to coexist here, but that might be challenging, given the current situation." Marek tilted her head, her webbed fingers still intertwined with Eric's. "What do you mean?" Eric sighed, running his free hand through his damp hair. "The village is divided because of me. Some fear what I represent, while others are curious. I need to address this somehow." As if on cue, raised voices drifted from the village center. Eric and Marek exchanged glances before hurrying back along the elevated walkways. They arrived to find a heated debate in progress, with two factions of Lemnorians facing off in the communal area. One elder, his skin patterns pulsing with agitation, gestured wildly. "The human's presence threatens our way of life. His very existence here is dangerous." Another elder, whom Eric recognized as one of his supporters, countered, "But think of what we could learn. His knowledge could advance our society by generations." Eric stepped forward, drawing all eyes to him. The universal translator on his wrist hummed as he spoke. "I understand your concerns. My presence here has caused confusion and fear. I'd like to address that if you'll allow me." The lead elder, his webbed appendages crossed, considered for a moment before nodding. "Speak, human." Eric took a deep breath, his mind racing. "I propose a formal presentation. I'll explain human biology and mating practices in detail. This way, you can understand the differences between our species and see that I pose no threat." Murmurs rippled through the gathered Lemnorians. Some nodded in approval, while others shrank back, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. The lead elder raised a webbed hand for silence. "Very well, human. You may give your presentation, but be warned, if this causes more discord, you may find yourself isolated from our village." Over the next few days, Eric prepared diligently. He used his datapad to create simple diagrams of human anatomy, working with Marek to ensure the universal translator could accurately convey complex biological terms. On the day of the presentation, Eric stood on the central platform, surrounded by curious and apprehensive Lemnorians. Marek stood beside him, ready to assist. The humid air buzzed with anticipation. "Thank you for this opportunity," Eric began, his words gurgling through the translator. He activated a holographic display from his wrist computer, showing a diagram of the human body. As Eric delved into the intricacies of human reproduction, he noticed varying reactions among his audience. Some leaned forward, fascinated by the alien concepts. Others recoiled, especially when he explained internal fertilization and live birth. Unlike Lemnorians, humans carry their offspring inside their bodies, Eric explained, pointing to the relevant diagram. The fetus develops over 9 months before birth. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. One Lemnorian called out, "Isn't that dangerous? How do you survive?" Eric smiled reassuringly. It's natural for us, just as your method of reproduction is natural for you. Our bodies are designed for it. Despite his efforts to emphasize the similarities between their species, the need for genetic diversity, the importance of pair bonding, Eric could see he was losing some of his audience. Marek, standing beside him, had grown increasingly tense, her moist skin taking on a paler hue. As the presentation concluded, Eric opened the floor for questions. The barrage that followed ranged from genuine curiosity to thinly veiled disgust. He answered each as honestly and sensitively as he could, acutely aware of the growing divide among the Lemnorians. In the days that followed, Eric noticed a shift in the village dynamics. Some Lemnorians approached him more frequently, eager to learn about human culture and technology. Others kept their distance, eyeing him warily as they passed on the elevated walkways. Marek, to Eric's dismay, fell into the latter category. She avoided him for several days, leaving him feeling isolated and concerned. He spent his time working on the ship's repairs, all too aware of the absence of her melodious, gurgling voice. On the fourth day after the presentation, Eric's wrist computer chimed with an incoming transmission. His heart raced as he activated the device, revealing a holographic message from Earth Command. Lieutenant Harrison, this is Captain Rodriguez of the ISS Horizon. We've received your distress signal and are en route to your location. Estimated arrival time is 3 weeks. Hold tight, soldier. Eric's emotions warred within him. Relief at the prospect of rescue, anxiety about leaving Lemnoria, and a surprising pang of regret at the thought of saying goodbye to Marek and the villagers who had accepted him. As if summoned by his thoughts, Marek appeared on the walkway leading to his hut. Her large eyes met his, a mixture of emotions swirling in their depths. Eric, she gurgled softly, I have questions about human intimacy, if you're willing to explain. Eric nodded, gesturing for her to join him. As they sat together, Marek's curiosity seemed to overcome her initial discomfort. She asked about emotional connections, physical pleasure, and the intricacies of human relationships. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the lead elder, his expression grave. The council has called a meeting, he announced. We must discuss the humans' impending departure and what it means for our people. As Eric followed the elder towards the village center, Marek fell into step beside him. The air crackled with tension, setting the stage for a debate that would determine the future of human-Lemnorian relations. Eric steeled himself for the challenges ahead, knowing that the next 3 weeks would be crucial in bridging the gap between their worlds. As Eric followed the lead elder towards the village center, his mind raced with possibilities. The impending arrival of the rescue ship had changed everything, and he knew he needed to act quickly to bridge the growing divide between himself and the Lemnorians. Stepping onto the central platform, Eric faced the gathered council and villagers. The air was thick with tension, and he could feel the weight of their gazes upon him. Taking a deep breath, he activated his translator and began to speak. Respected elders, people of Lemnoria, he said, his words gurgling through the device. I understand my presence here has caused confusion and concern. In the short time before my people arrive, I propose a cultural exchange program. I'll participate in your daily activities, and in return I'll share aspects of human culture with you. This way, we can learn from each other and foster better understanding. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The lead elder's brow furrowed as he considered the proposal. After a moment of deliberation, he nodded slowly. Very well, human. We will allow this exchange. But be warned, any further disruption to our way of life will not be tolerated. The next morning, Eric found himself standing at the edge of the village's central pool, surrounded by curious Lemnorians. He watched as they gracefully slipped into the water, submerging themselves in what appeared to be a daily ritual. Taking a deep breath, Eric plunged in after them. The shock of the cool water hit him immediately, and he struggled to hold his breath as he watched the Lemnorians move effortlessly around him. His lungs burned as he fought the urge to surface, determined to participate fully in their custom. Just as his vision began to blur, he felt a webbed hand grasp his arm, pulling him up. Breaking the surface, Eric gasped for air, his heart pounding. He looked up to see Marique, her large eyes filled with concern. You stayed under too long, she gurgled, her translator conveying a mix of worry and admiration. But you tried. That matters to us. Over the next few days, Eric continued to participate in Lemnorian rituals, each time pushing his limits a little further. In return, he introduced human customs, starting with the concept of handshakes. This is how we greet each other formally, Eric explained, extending his hand to a bewildered elder. The Lemnorian studied Eric's outstretched palm before hesitantly pressing his webbed hand against it. It feels strange, the elder commented, flexing his fingers. But interesting. Why do humans do this? It's a sign of trust, Eric replied, showing we're not carrying weapons and mean no harm. As the days passed, Eric noticed a shift in the village's atmosphere. Many Lemnorians began approaching him with questions about Earth and human culture. Even those who had been wary before showed cautious interest. One afternoon, Eric decided to introduce the Lemnorians to a human sport. He used his datapad to project holographic goalposts on either end of a cleared area near the village. This game is called soccer, he explained to the gathered crowd. The objective is to move this ball into the opposing team's goal using only your feet and head. The Lemnorians watched in fascination as Eric demonstrated basic dribbling and kicking techniques. When invited to try, they were initially clumsy on land, their webbed feet ill-suited for the precise movements required. However, their natural agility soon shone through as they adapted the game to their abilities. Marek, who had been observing from the sidelines, suddenly had an idea. What if we played in the shallows, she suggested. We could use our hands and feet like we do when swimming. Eric grinned, nodding enthusiastically. That's perfect, let's try it. The resulting game was a chaotic but joyous affair, with Lemnorians diving and splashing as they passed the ball between them. Even some of the elders joined in, their laughter echoing across the water. As the cultural exchange continued, Eric found himself spending more time with Marek. She had taken on the role of his primary guide and translator, her initial fear of human physiology giving way to curiosity. One evening, as they sat by the edge of the village, Marek turned to Eric with a thoughtful expression. Eric, she began, her voice soft through the translator, I've been wondering about human relationships. How do you connect with each other? Eric felt a flutter in his chest at the question. He chose his words carefully, aware of the cultural sensitivities at play. Well, we form emotional bonds through shared experiences and communication. Physical intimacy is also important for many humans, but it varies greatly between individuals and cultures. Marek listened intently, her large eyes fixed on Eric's face. And what about you? She asked, her webbed fingers inching closer to his hand. How do you connect? Before Eric could respond, a commotion from the village center caught their attention. They hurried back along the elevated walkways to find a group of Lemnorians gathered around Zorn, a male who had always regarded Eric with suspicion. Can't you see what's happening? Zorn was saying, his skin patterns pulsing with agitation. The human is corrupting our ways. We must remove him before his people arrive, and more damage is done. Eric stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Zorn, I understand your concerns, but I assure you... He never got to finish his sentence. Zorn lunged forward, attempting to physically remove Eric from the gathering. Acting on instinct, Eric defended himself, using his superior strength to push Zorn away. To his horror, he heard a sharp crack as Zorn stumbled backward, clutching his arm. The village erupted into chaos. Some Lemnorians rushed to Zorn's aid, while others formed a protective circle around Eric. The elders quickly called for order, ushering Eric away from the scene. As he was led to his hut and placed under guard, Eric caught a glimpse of Marek's face. She looked torn, her eyes filled with a mix of fear, concern, and something else. Something that made Eric's heart race despite the gravity of the situation. Confined to his hut, Eric paced back and forth, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. The rescue ship was still weeks away, and now, with this incident, his tenuous position in the village hung by a thread. As night fell, he wondered what the coming days would bring, and whether the bonds he had formed, especially with Marek, would be strong enough to weather the storm. As dawn broke, Eric heard a commotion outside his hut. The door swung open, revealing the lead elder flanked by two guards. "Human," the elder said, his voice grave. "The council has reached a decision. For everyone's safety, you will be confined to a secure area on the outskirts of the village until your people arrive." Eric nodded, understanding the precariousness of his situation. As he was escorted through the village, he caught glimpses of Merrick being led away in the opposite direction, her large eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. The next few days passed in a blur of isolation and introspection. Eric's new dwelling, a small hut nestled at the edge of the misty jungle, offered little comfort. He spent his time meticulously documenting his experiences in his mission log, hoping that his observations would prove valuable for future human-Lemnorian relations. Day 47, Eric dictated into his wrist computer. The Lemnorians' amphibious nature extends beyond their physiology. Their social structures are fluid, adapting to new situations with a speed that would put human bureaucracies to shame. However, this flexibility has its limits, as evidenced by the current situation. He paused, looking out at the swirling mist beyond his confinement. The impending arrival of the rescue ship has created a palpable tension in the village. The Lemnorians are faced with a decision that will shape their future interactions with humanity. I only hope that the bridges we've built over the past weeks will be strong enough to withstand the strain. Meanwhile, across the village, Merrick found herself under house arrest in her family's dwelling. The once comforting curves of her home now felt oppressive as she faced the scrutiny of her community. "How could you betray us like this?" Her clutchmate, Zira, gurgled angrily. "Consorting with the alien, risking our entire way of life." Merrick's skin rippled with frustration. "I didn't betray anyone," she retorted. "I was trying to understand, to build connections. Isn't that what we've always done when faced with the unknown?" As days passed, the village buzzed with debate. Eric could hear snippets of conversation from his guards, their translator devices occasionally picking up heated arguments about the future of human-Lemnorian relations. On the 5th day of his confinement, Eric's wrist computer chimed with an urgent alert. The rescue ship had entered Lemnoria's atmosphere ahead of schedule. His heart raced as he realized the critical juncture they had reached. Suddenly, the door to his hut burst open. Merrick stood there, her skin flushed with exertion, accompanied by another young Lemnorian. "Eric," Merrick gasped, "we have to go, now!" Without hesitation, Eric grabbed his mission log and followed Merrick and her companion into the misty jungle. As they ran, Merrick explained the situation in hurried bursts. "The village is in chaos," she said. "The elders can't agree on what to do. Lyra here," she gestured to her companion, "organized a protest. We think if we can facilitate a peaceful first contact with your rescue team, we can show everyone the potential for positive relations between our species." Eric nodded, his mind racing. "The ship will be landing soon. We need to hurry." They pushed through the dense foliage, the mist clinging to their skin. Eric could hear shouts in the distance. They were being pursued. Lyra led them along hidden paths, her knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable. As they neared the landing site, the air vibrated with the roar of engines. Through gaps in the canopy, Eric caught glimpses of the rescue ship's lights cutting through the haze. "There!" he shouted, pointing to a clearing ahead. They burst from the jungle's edge just as the ship touched down, its massive form settling onto the soggy Lemnorian soil. Eric, Merrick, and Lyra stood at the fringe of the clearing, chests heaving from their sprint. The ship's hatch began to open with a hydraulic hiss. Eric glanced at Merrick, seeing his own mix of anticipation and anxiety mirrored in her large eyes. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. The rest of the village wasn't far behind. As the hatch lowered to form a ramp, Eric squared his shoulders. The next few moments would be critical in shaping the future of both their species. He felt Merrick's webbed hand slip into his, a silent gesture of solidarity. The mist swirled around their feet as the first figures emerged from the ship. Captain Rodriguez, flanked by 2 security officers, stepped onto Lemnorian soil. His eyes widened as he took in the scene before him. Eric standing hand in hand with an alien creature, another close behind, and the sounds of an approaching crowd echoing through the mist-shrouded jungle. "Lieutenant Harrison," Rodriguez called, his hand hovering near his sidearm. "Report. What's the situation here?" Eric opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the pursuing Lemnorians burst into the clearing. Led by the village elders, with Zorn close behind, they skidded to a halt at the sight of the human ship and its crew. For a moment, everything was still. Humans and Lemnorians regarded each other with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The fate of two species hung in the balance, with Eric, Marek, and Lyra caught in the middle. Eric took a deep breath, knowing that his next words could determine the course of human-Lemnorian relations for generations to come. He stepped forward, still holding Marek's hand, ready to bridge the gap between their worlds. Worlds. The tension in the air was palpable as Captain Rodriguez's hand hovered near his sidearm, his eyes darting between Eric and the alien creatures beside him. Before Eric could speak, the sound of rustling foliage and urgent voices filled the clearing. The pursuing Lemnorians burst onto the scene, led by the village elders, with Zorn close behind. They skidded to a halt, their large eyes widening at the sight of the human ship and its crew. For a moment, silence reigned. Humans and Lemnorians regarded each other with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Eric felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, knowing that his next words could shape the future of both species. Suddenly, the ship's hatch opened wider, and 4 more figures emerged. Leading them was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern expression, Captain Marcus Dixon. He surveyed the scene with a practiced eye, quickly assessing the potential threats and allies. "Lieutenant Harrison," Dixon called out, his voice cutting through the tension. "Report. What's the situation here?" Eric took a deep breath, squeezing Marek's hand for reassurance. He stepped forward, ready to bridge the gap between their two worlds. "Captain Dixon, sir. We're in a delicate situation. These are the Lemnorians, the native inhabitants of this planet. We've been establishing first contact." Dixon nodded, his training in first contact protocols kicking in. He raised his hands in a universal gesture of peace and spoke slowly. "We come in peace. We mean you no harm." The Lemnorian elders chittered amongst themselves, their skin patterns shifting rapidly. Eric's translator struggled to keep up with their rapid-fire communication. Zorn pushed his way to the front, his arms still bandaged from the earlier altercation. "They bring weapons," Zorn shouted, pointing accusingly at the human sidearms. "They seek to conquer us, just as I warned." Eric quickly translated for Captain Dixon, who frowned at the misunderstanding. No, Dixon said, motioning for his team to stand down. "These are standard issue. We're not here to fight." As Eric relayed this message, he noticed the confusion and fear on the Lemnorians' faces. He realized that bridging this cultural divide would require more than just words. Drawing on his experiences over the past weeks, Eric decided to take a risk. "Captain," he said, turning to Dixon, "with your permission, I'd like to try something." At Dixon's nod, Eric slowly approached the Lemnorian elders. He extended his hand, palm up, in the gesture he had taught them earlier. "Remember this," he said softly. "It's a sign of trust, of peace." The lead elder hesitated, then slowly reached out and pressed his webbed hand against Eric's. A ripple of surprise went through the Lemnorian crowd. Seizing the moment, Eric continued, "These humans are my people, just as you have become my friends. We have so much to learn from each other. Captain Dixon and his team have technology and knowledge that could benefit Lemnoria greatly." As if on cue, Dr. Sarah Thompson, the mission's medical officer, stepped forward. "We have advanced medical capabilities," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "We'd be honored to share our knowledge with you." Eric translated, noting the interest that flickered in the elder's eyes. But before anyone could respond, a commotion erupted behind him. He turned to see Marek swaying on her feet, her skin taking on an alarming pallor. "Marek!" Eric cried, rushing to her side. She collapsed into his arms, her breathing labored. Dr. Thompson was there in an instant, her medical scanner already whirring. "She's experiencing severe dehydration," the doctor announced. "The dry air around the ship must be affecting her." Without hesitation, Thompson pulled out a small device from her medkit. She pressed it against Marek's neck, and there was a soft hiss as it delivered a precise dose of fluids and electrolytes. The effect was almost immediate. Color returned to Marek's skin, and her breathing eased. She blinked up at Eric, then at Dr. Thompson, wonder replacing the fear in her eyes. This incident seemed to break the remaining tension. The Lemnorian elders crowded around, chittering excitedly as they watched Dr. Thompson work. Even Zorn seemed momentarily forgotten as the Lemnorians witnessed the effectiveness of human medical technology firsthand. "Remarkable," one of the elders said, his translator struggling to convey his awe. "Such swift healing. Perhaps there is much we can learn from each other after all." Captain Dixon, recognizing the shift in atmosphere, stepped forward once more. "We would be honored to engage in formal diplomatic talks," he said, Eric translating. "Our mission is one of peace and mutual understanding." The lead elder nodded slowly, his skin patterns shifting to reflect deep thought. "We will hear you out," he decided. "Come, we shall return to the village and discuss this properly." As the two groups began to move towards the village, Eric felt a surge of hope. The initial crisis had been averted, but he knew that the real work of building understanding between humans and Lemnorians was just beginning. Marek, now steady on her feet, fell into step beside him. "Eric," she said softly, her large eyes fixed on him. I think I understand now. What you said about human physiology, about connections. It's not just about physical differences, is it? It's about how we can complement each other, help each other grow." Eric nodded, a warm feeling spreading through his chest. "Exactly, and I think we've only scratched the surface of what we can learn from each other." As they walked, Eric noticed Captain Dixon conferring with his team. They were already setting up portable communication devices, establishing a link with the ship and presumably Earth itself. The implications of this moment, the first official human-Lemnorian diplomatic contact, were not lost on him. Ahead, he could see the village coming into view through the mist. The elevated walkways were crowded with curious Lemnorians, their skin patterns flickering with excitement and apprehension. Eric knew that the next few days would be crucial in shaping the future of human-Lemnorian relations. As they approached the village center, Eric overheard Captain Dixon speaking to one of his officers. "Set up a temporary outpost here," Dixon was saying. "We'll need a base of operations for the negotiations and cultural exchange." Eric's mind raced with the possibilities. A human outpost on Lemnoria would open up countless opportunities for research, diplomacy, and personal connections. He glanced at Marek, who was listening intently to Dr. Thompson explain some aspect of human biology. The future stretched out before them, full of potential and challenges. As they stepped onto the village's central platform, Eric knew that his role in this historic moment was not nearly finished. The real work of bridging their two worlds was just beginning. The real work of bridging their two worlds was just starting to unfold. As the days passed, the human outpost took shape on the outskirts of the Lemnorian village. Prefabricated structures rose from the misty ground, their sleek lines contrasting with the organic curves of Lemnorian architecture. The air buzzed with the hum of human technology and the excited chatter of Lemnorians. Eric found himself constantly moving between the two worlds, translating not just words, but concepts and cultural nuances. He watched with pride as Dr. Thompson shared medical knowledge with fascinated Lemnorian healers, and engineers from both species collaborated on projects to improve village infrastructure. But beneath the surface of progress, tensions simmered. Eric couldn't help but notice the way Zorn's eyes narrowed whenever humans passed by, or the hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when he approached. He shared his concerns with Marek one evening as they sat on the edge of her dwelling, their feet dangling over the misty forest floor. "I'm worried, Marek," he said, his voice low. "Zorn's been too quiet lately. It doesn't feel right." Marek's skin rippled with concern. Many of the elders support the humans now, but Zorn still has followers. They whisper of preserving our way of life, of the dangers of change. Before Eric could respond, a deafening boom shook the air. The peaceful evening erupted into chaos as energy blasts lit up the mist, their eerie glow reflecting off the droplets like 1,000 tiny mirrors. "The outpost!" Eric shouted, leaping to his feet. He could see the flashes of weapons fire in the distance, hear the shouts of humans and Lemnorians alike. Marek grabbed his arm, her large eyes wide with fear. "Eric, wait! It's too dangerous!" but Eric was already moving, his training kicking in. "I have to help my team," he said, his voice firm. "Come with me if you want, but I'm going." To his surprise, Merrick nodded, her fear giving way to grit. "I'm with you," she said, falling into step beside him. They raced through the village, the elevated walkways trembling beneath their feet. As they rounded a corner, they nearly collided with Lyra, who was leading a group of young Lemnorians armed with makeshift weapons. "Zorn and his followers are attacking the human outpost," Lyra explained breathlessly. "They've modified our weapons with human technology. We're going to help defend the humans." Eric nodded, grateful for the support. Together they made their way towards the outpost, the sounds of battle growing louder with each step. The scene that greeted them was one of chaos. Energy blasts crisscrossed the air, leaving scorched patterns on the mist. Human security officers and their Lemnorian allies were retreating towards the fortified core of the outpost, returning fire as they went. Eric spotted Captain Dixon coordinating the defense from a makeshift command center. "Lieutenant Harrison," Dixon shouted when he saw Eric, "we're under attack by hostile Lemnorians. They've breached our outer defenses. We need every able body to help hold the line." Eric grabbed a weapon from a nearby supply crate, quickly explaining its function to Merrick and Lyra. The three of them joined the defensive line, firing at the advancing Lemnorians while trying to avoid lethal shots. The battle raged on, the air thick with energy discharges and the acrid smell of burnt vegetation. Eric found himself marveling at the unexpected advantages of fighting alongside Lemnorians. Their natural agility and ability to change skin color for camouflage proved invaluable in the chaotic skirmish. Suddenly, a searing pain exploded in Eric's side. He stumbled, looking down to see a smoking wound where a Lemnorian energy weapon had grazed him. He fell to one knee, his vision blurring. "Eric!" Merrick's voice seemed to come from far away. He felt her webbed hands on his face, saw the panic in her large eyes. Then, to his amazement, she began to work on his wound with surprising efficiency. "I've been studying human anatomy," she explained, her fingers moving deftly. "Your circulatory system is so different from ours, but I think I can help." As Merrick worked, Eric became aware of a commotion nearby. Through the haze of pain, he saw a familiar figure advancing through the battle. Zorn. The Lemnorian rebel leader moved with deadly purpose, his modified weapon cutting a path through the defenders. His eyes locked onto Eric and Merrick, narrowing with hatred. "Traitor!" Zorn snarled at Merrick, raising his weapon. "You choose these aliens over your own people?" Eric struggled to his feet, pushing Merrick behind him. Despite the pain, he faced Zorn, unarmed but defiant. Zorn laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the din of battle. "You think you can defeat me, human? In your weakened state?" Instead of answering, Eric lunged forward. He knew he couldn't match Zorn's agility, but he had one advantage, his human strength and mass. He tackled Zorn, sending them both crashing to the ground. They grappled fiercely, a desperate struggle that showcased the physical differences between their species. Eric's powerful build gave him an edge in close quarters, but Zorn's flexibility allowed him to slip out of holds that would have immobilized a human. Just as Zorn was about to break free, a brilliant flash of light erupted nearby. Eric squinted against the sudden glare, realizing it was coming from Merrick. She had activated her bioluminescent capabilities to their fullest extent, creating a blinding display. Zorn, his large eyes more sensitive to light than Eric's, recoiled in pain. Eric seized the opportunity, pinning Zorn to the ground and wrenching the weapon from his grasp. "It's over, Zorn," Eric panted, his wound throbbing but his grip firm. As if his words had broken a spell, the sounds of battle began to fade. Zorn's followers, seeing their leader captured, began to lay down their weapons. The combined forces of humans and loyal Lemnorians quickly secured the area. In the aftermath, Dr. Thompson's medical team worked tirelessly, treating injured humans and Lemnorians alike. The effectiveness of human medical technology, demonstrated so clearly in the wake of battle, left many Lemnorians in awe. Eric watched as Captain Dixon conferred with the Lemnorian elders, who had arrived to survey the damage. Their expressions were grave but united. Zorn's actions had only strengthened their determination to work with the humans. Marek approached Eric, her skin patterns shifting with concern as she examined his bandaged wound. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft. Eric nodded, managing a smile despite his exhaustion. "Thanks to you," he said. "You were amazing out there." Marek's skin flushed with a pattern Eric had come to recognize as embarrassment. "I just did what felt right," she said. "I couldn't let anything happen to you." As they stood there, surrounded by the signs of battle but also of cooperation and shared purpose, Eric felt a profound sense of change. The attack had been a crucible, forging stronger bonds between humans and Lemnorians. Captain Dixon's voice cut through Eric's thoughts. "Harrison," he called, "I need you and Marek for a debriefing. We've got a lot to discuss about the future of human-Lemnorian relations." Eric nodded, exchanging a look with Marek. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As they walked towards the captain, Eric couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in there. Eric and Marek's journey back to the command center was slower than their frantic rush into battle. Eric leaned heavily on Marek, his wound throbbing with each step. As they approached, they could see the activity had shifted from combat to recovery. Humans and Lemnorians worked side by side, clearing debris and tending to the injured. Captain Dixon greeted them with a nod, his face lined with fatigue but his eyes bright with commitment. "Good work out there, both of you," he said. "Harrison, get yourself to the medical bay. We'll debrief once Dr. Thompson clears you." Over the next few weeks, as Eric recovered under Dr. Thompson's expert care, the true impact of the attack began to unfold. Rather than driving a wedge between humans and Lemnorians, Zorn's actions had the opposite effect. The shared experience of defending the outpost had forged new bonds between the two species. Marek was a constant presence at Eric's side during his recovery. She absorbed every detail of his treatment, her natural curiosity blending with a deep concern for his well-being. Dr. Thompson, recognizing Marek's aptitude, began to teach her more about human physiology. "Your circulatory system is fascinating," Marek said one afternoon, her large eyes fixed on the monitor displaying Eric's vital signs. "So different from ours, yet equally efficient in its own way." Eric smiled, reaching out to take her webbed hand in his. "I think that's true of a lot of things between our species," he said. "Different, but complementary." As Eric regained his strength, the human presence on Lemnoria continued to grow. The permanent diplomatic mission arrived, bringing with it a wealth of new technology and expertise. The original outpost expanded into a small settlement, its architecture a blend of human practicality and Lemnorian organic aesthetics. Eric and Marek found themselves at the forefront of this integration. Their unique relationship made them natural ambassadors between the two cultures. They spent long hours in meetings, helping to smooth over misunderstandings and find common ground. One evening, as they walked along one of the elevated paths that connected the human settlement to the Lemnorian village, Marek turned to Eric with a look of persistence. "Eric," she said, her skin patterns shifting in a way he'd come to recognize as nervousness. "I've been thinking about what you told me about human mating practices. I think I'm ready to try." Eric felt a surge of emotion, excitement, love, and a touch of apprehension. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. "There's no rush. We can take all the time you need." Marek nodded, her large eyes fixed on his. "I'm sure. Dr. Thompson has explained everything to me, and I want to share this with you." They chose a special dwelling for their first intimate encounter, one that had been designed with interspecies couples in mind. It featured areas of dry land for Eric's comfort, alongside shallow pools for Marique. As they entered, the bioluminescent plants that lined the walls sensed their presence and began to glow softly, casting the room in a gentle, ethereal light. Eric took Marek's hands in his, marveling at the contrast between his fingers and her webbed digits. "We'll go slow," he promised. "Just tell me if anything feels uncomfortable." Their union was a dance of discovery. Eric guided Marek patiently through each new sensation, always attentive to her reactions. For her part, Marek approached the experience with the same curiosity and openness she brought to all aspects of human culture. As they lay together afterward, Marek's skin glowing with a pattern Eric had never seen before, she turned to him with wonder in her eyes. "That was incredible," she said softly. so different from anything I could have imagined. Eric pulled her close, feeling the damp coolness of her skin against his. It was incredible for me too, he murmured. Thank you for trusting me. News of their successful intimate encounter spread quickly through both communities. While there was some initial shock, particularly among the more conservative Lemnorians, the overall reaction was one of fascination and acceptance. It seemed to mark a new phase in human-Lemnorian relations, proof that the two species could find harmony even in the most personal aspects of life. Inspired by Eric and Merrick's example, other humans and Lemnorians began to form romantic relationships. Dr. Thompson found herself inundated with requests for information about interspecies intimacy. She approached the subject with her usual scientific rigor, launching a comprehensive study of human Lemnorian biology. The possibilities are fascinating, she told Eric and Merrick during one of their regular checkups. We're seeing some remarkable adaptive responses in both human and Lemnorian physiology. It's opening up whole new avenues of research. As the months passed, Eric and Merrick's relationship deepened. They moved into a shared dwelling that bridged the human settlement and the Lemnorian village, a physical representation of their role in the community. Together, they established educational programs to foster understanding between the two species. Their classes on interspecies cultural exchange and biology became wildly popular. Humans and Lemnorians alike flocked to learn about each other's customs, particularly when it came to mating practices. Eric and Merrick approached these sensitive topics with a blend of scientific objectivity and personal experience that put their students at ease. 5 years after Eric's crash landing, Lemnoria had been transformed. The once swampy planet now boasted advanced infrastructure that respected the natural environment while providing comfort for both humans and Lemnorians. The original village had expanded into a thriving metropolis, with architecture that seamlessly blended both species' needs. Eric and Merrick stood at the heart of this new society. Their marriage, celebrated according to both human and Lemnorian customs, had become a symbol of successful interspecies cooperation. And now, thanks to Dr. Thompson's groundbreaking research, they were about to embark on a new adventure: parenthood. As they stood on the balcony of their home, overlooking the city they had helped build, Merrick placed Eric's hand on her swollen belly. Inside, their child grew, the first of its kind, a bridge between two worlds. "Can you believe how far we've come?" Merrick asked, her skin glowing with joy. Eric shook his head, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this point. "From crash landing to this," he said, gesturing at the thriving city below them. "It's more than I ever could have imagined." As the sun set, painting the misty sky in a brilliant hues, they prepared to join their friends, both human and Lemnorian, for a celebration. It would begin with a traditional Lemnorian bioluminescent body painting ceremony, followed by a human-style barbecue. The gathering was a testament to how far they had come, a perfect blend of both their cultures. Eric looked at Merrick, her skin shimmering in the fading light, and felt a surge of love and pride. Together, they had bridged the gap between two worlds, creating something beautiful and unique. And as they stepped out into the warm Lemnorian night, hand in hand, Eric knew that their greatest adventures still lay ahead.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. And for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.